Welcome to everyone. This is the first lecture in a series that will talk about economic democracy. We have Professor David Ellerman, and he's going to give us a few proposals for development of workers-owned enterprises. David.
Okay. Thank you. I think we have enough sound so nobody will have trouble hearing in the room. There's an old joke that if Americans are not understood by Europeans, they just speak louder. And so I'm sure everybody will hear this the first time. Congratulations on finding the place. And I'm going to actually talk about two different strategies that have emerged in the U.S. on the left, red and green strategies, as you might call them here. But to begin, I want to just sort of lay out the basic division on the left that determines what types of strategies that people adopt. And this is sort of a very concise way to do it, is to ask, why does a political party want to get into power? What are they going to do? And one view is they want to get into power so they can do good things for people: universal health care, education, pension, basic income, job guarantees, and so forth. And so this is at least the meaning of socialism as socialism has been defined in the 20th century. There are older meanings of socialism in the 19th century, but this is at least the modern meaning. And in this view, the sort of agency of the people is essentially to get the left parties elected to government, and then they can sort of relax until the next election and elect them again. So the alternative point of view, which is basically the idea to get a party in power, is to change things so people are empowered themselves to do good things for themselves. So it's very much more decentralized vision of the future. There's no good labels for it. You call it libertarian left. Noam Chomsky would be sort of an example of a person. And so under this view, the goal is people to control their own economic life, which means being a member of their enterprise, worker ownership of their business, and the agency of the people is decentralized so that they can do things for themselves. And this, of course, means taking the market seriously, that the market as a servant and not as a master. So these are two broad visions of the left. The sort of what in the 20th century would be called the socialist vision, and the sort of left libertarian vision. So what I'm going to be saying is coming from this more left libertarian version of the left, where the idea is to decentralize power so people can control their lives and their jobs, and otherwise, rather than having the government do things for them. So start off on sort of the green part of this. I'm here channeling the work of Peter Barnes. Peter is an old friend and has had a very interesting career in America. He just came out with a book called With Liberty and Dividends for All, and it is around in electronic form. If anybody wants a copy of it, this can be arranged. And Peter started off as an entrepreneur, starting a solar energy company in San Francisco, which was an ESOP, an employee stock ownership plan, which I'll talk about later. And it was one of the first ones in the United States that really tried to be more democratic, involving all the workforce on an equal basis, as if in a cooperative. And then Peter went on to focus more on the specifically green issues about the allocation of natural resources. The basic idea being that everybody has an equal right to natural resources that are not the fruits of anybody's labor. And so how do you implement that sort of a right in a given political system. And this idea goes back in America to Henry George, or even back before Henry George to Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine, one of the original American revolutionaries, British by origin, and his last book was called Agrarian Justice, and spelled out this whole idea that people have this equal right to all natural resources, and the political system and property system should be organized in a way to recognize that. So that's the starting point of Peter's thesis. And the idea is that when people use, specific people or companies use these natural resources, then that use will, of course, be different for different individuals and different companies, so that needs to be charged for. That revenue needs to be collected and then redistributed to all the citizens. So the citizens get their equal right in the form of an equal social dividend from these natural resources. And this is the part of his book, Dividends to All. And it's quite important in that sort of scheme that the dividend not be just treated as government income. And this is part of the libertarian part of this thesis, is that if the income from natural resources just goes to the government and they choose how to spend it for the good of the people, then it's non-transparent and you don't see what's happening. And we all know the result of that. So the political strategy here, let me just say a moment about the two sources before the political strategy. The idea being that rather than selling natural resources all at once, to have lease arrangements so that there's a continuous income generated by the resources, and this income can then be redistributed equally to the citizens as social dividends. And remarkably enough, this has actually happened in the United States and Alaska. And the situation there was that the state of Alaska owned all the oil. It was state territory on the North Shore, the northern part of Alaska. And rather than just privatize this by selling it to oil companies, they arranged a lease arrangement so that the oil companies would come in and develop it, but would pay as they go for the resources, instead of having this huge income coming all at once. It comes in the form of these lease payments. And a pipeline was built down through Alaska to put it on ships and so forth. But the arrangement was that an Alaska Permanent Fund was set up, and the lease payments then went into this Alaska Permanent Fund and then were distributed in cash to all citizens of Alaska. And I think it's like 1 year. You've got to be a citizen of the state of Alaska for 1 year. And then this goes to every man, woman, and child in the state. And this is something that's supported by both the left and the right in Alaska. Alaska is the home of Sarah Palin, you may have heard of, and she of course supports this, and she has even endorsed this book, which is very humorous to those of us on the left that now have Peter's book with a blurb on the cover from Sarah Palin. And but it's something that once you start a dividend program like this, it becomes sacrosanct. It becomes what we call the third rail, something you cannot touch politically without getting killed. And so once you set up a program like this, it becomes very hard to ever change it, to ever remove it, and which politicians will want to do. So that is built into this sort of strategy. Another source, and Peter's book goes into all sorts of sources, but another major source is emissions trading scheme. The idea here is that given the whole future of global warming and the emissions, that there needs to be some way to handle this, and one way to do it that uses the market is emissions trading schemes, but is sometimes called cap and trade, or in the form that Peter recommended, cap and dividend. So the idea is that you have ways to monitor the emissions, which is not that difficult now in factories, and the government sets a maximum, and you have to have a license or a permit, which are sold on the market in order to pollute, in order to emit the carbon dioxide or SO2, the sulfur dioxide, into that. And so there have been various ways this has been set up. My brother, who is a rather conservative economist, did a lot of the research on this. There was a center at M.I.T. that studied energy and the environment, which he ran for a number of years, and has 2 books out from Cambridge University Press, if you're really interested in all the gory details. One on the SO2 trading scheme in the United States, which is called Markets for Clean Air, and a book just came out, also Cambridge University Press, called Pricing Carbon, which is a study of the European emissions trading scheme, which a number of things went wrong with, but it's a learning process, that when something like that doesn't work well, then one can study it more and see how to plug the loopholes and how to tighten it up and do it better the next time, failing any better alternative. And my brother is, as I said, was fairly conservative and voted Republican in all elections except the last 2. He couldn't manage to vote for Sarah Palin, but he has always traditionally voted Republican. But now even the Republicans in America have rejected the market solution to these controlling these pollutants, and so just calling it a tax on businesses. So he's now doing consulting in Europe, because the Europeans are a bit more rational than the American Republican Party. And so a new center like the one at MIT has just been set up at the European University in Florence, and they'll be doing research on how to modify the emission trading scheme or carbon tax schemes or whatever to see how to do this. But the idea in both cases of least resource rights or these emission trading schemes is to charge people for the use of natural resources. In the case of the emissions, you're like using up the natural resource, which is the atmosphere, clean air, and if you're not, if you have an industrial economy and you're not going to basically deindustrialize on a massive scale, then you need something like this to charge people for emitting CO2, SO2, and a number of the other pollutants. So the question then is, if you arrange to do this in a way that it feeds into a social dividend scheme, then you get enormous political support for it, and that's been the strategy. To rather than do just cap and trade and have the license fees come into the government and the politicians spend it, you do cap and dividend, where the license fees come in and are then dividend back to the citizens. So people are actually receiving a check in their, you can distribute electronically or the same way that our Social Security checks are distributed, and this is your share of natural resources that are used up by companies or persons, and that makes it very popular. That makes it something that can jump a lot of hurdles in Congress to get it passed, and it makes it very solid once it's in place. And that's the point I make here. The political strategy is throughout this is to directly dividend this sort of income to citizens, and whatever money you need for other public purposes raised by taxes. Do not allow the money coming in to the government to be then allocated by the government directly. It goes back to the citizens, and then by raising the money you need for other public purposes by taxes forces more scrutiny on that. So the whole political process of expenditure becomes more transparent that way, as opposed to having some unknown amount of money raised from oil leases and then spent according to the way the politicians want to spend it. So that's a set of green strategies, but running along the line of the more libertarian approach of putting the money back into the people's hands and getting a broader spectrum of political support to be able to do it, and as opposed to the idea of getting this money and then giving it to the great and good, to good for the people, which is the way it'd be done on other approaches. So this is the sort of green part of what I wanted to talk about, this general idea of pricing the use of natural resources and such as the oil or such as the clean air, where everyone has a equal right to it, and then distributing the results as a social dividend. The older form of this, of course, was land itself, land naturalization, and the problem there is that once land has been privatized, and this is true of any natural resource, once it's been privatized and sold 10 times, then you can't just renationalize it because the people that then own it paid the full price for it. And to try to unravel the whole sequence, the whole provenance of title back to whoever originally privatized it is very difficult. And so the idea that land in its natural uses as well as land in its urban uses, where the value of the land is due to the urban site and not to anything that the owner has done on the site, this has been bought and sold so many times that it's politically unfeasible just to try to grab it, nationalize it, and then do some sort of a lease arrangement. The North Shore oil in Alaska had not been sold, and so there wasn't that problem. So the lease arrangement could be set up from the beginning, and that's how it worked. A much larger problem is, of course, the ownership of land. And the Henry George strategy was, rather than try to renationalize the land and get, which is never possible politically, is to slowly increase the taxation on land value, and so that you're not taxing improvements, but you're taxing sort of the natural value of the land and the value of the urban land site value of the land, and that would be another source of strategy, and that's what's in America is called the Georgist movement. Henry George, and made some progress in the 19th century, but has been largely submerged and ignored in the 20th century. So there are a number of sources of this social dividend from people's natural ownership in natural resources, or what is created by the community, the urban land site value. And this strategy is to try to collect the revenue from that and then redistribute it to all the citizens equally, and then force the government to raise whatever monies they need by taxes, and which forces the public justification of how that's going to be spent. So that's sort of the green part of the talk. And the part on economic strategy is the same idea, general idea of empowering people to do good for themselves rather than having good done for them by the government or do-gooders. Yep.
Before we go on, do you maybe know how much money we're talking about, this dividend that people get in Alaska?
Yeah, it's not like a basic income unless you live in the woods and hunt for your own food. It's like $4,000 a year, and that $4 a year in general. So, by the way, one of the related issues much discussed these days is the idea of a guaranteed minimum income, and we were just down at the Green Academy in Wies. And I was surprised to hear the person who was head of the Green Party in England talking about a guaranteed minimum income, but not even connecting it to natural resources and to these sources. And so it's very important. If you're going to talk about that, at least talk about the source of the guaranteed minimum income, and the natural green thing is to say relate the source to what we all have an equal right to, as I've been talking about. But that alone may or may not add up to guaranteed minimum income, which is a separate issue. So in the case of Alaska, it does not, and unless you have a very good year, and or unless you live in a very primitive way, then $4,000 won't quite do it. So now to the main thing people do outside of their home is to work. That's the if you're going to have control of your lives, then it's very important to have the control of your lives in the workplace. And as you know, the basic idea in Yugoslavia was to try to invent a decentralized form of socialism rather than the state form of socialism in the other, certainly in the Soviet Union or other East European countries. And the idea is an old idea, and it's still around, but the idea of trying to combine it with socialism doesn't have to be combined with socialism, and certainly so I'm sort of speaking from a more cooperative tradition that does not see the decentralized control of your workplace as part of a socialist strategy, at least. And of course, again, I'm using the word socialism in what it means in the 20th century, not what it means in the 19th century, which had all sorts of other meanings. So the basic idea here is the right of self-governance in all aspects of life, which includes the workplace, and ownership of the fruits of your labor, which is the old idea behind private property. That private property has been totally distorted in the capitalist system as we have it, but the original idea is that you have the ownership of the fruits of your labor, and what is given by nature is not the fruits of anybody's labor, and that's why everybody has an equal right to it. But what is the fruits of your labor is by right in the hands of those that produce it, and meaning the people in enterprise, and that includes, if you develop these ideas in a slightly more technical way, that includes the negative fruits, that includes the cost, because what you use up, speak in abstract economist terms, you use up inputs and you produce outputs, and those are the negative fruits of your labor and the positive fruits of your labor. And the firm itself is the one that has to bear those costs and owns that output, and so the argument is that the people that work in the firm should be the members of the firm, and it has nothing to do with state ownership or even social ownership. It's the termination of the membership of the firm, meaning they appropriate positive and negative fruits of their labor and have the self-governance over that important part of their life. So this is an example of decentralized empowerment. This is not state ownership. This is not social ownership, whatever that means. This is the control of firms by the people that work in the firms. And it's not the empowerment of government to do good things for people. So this is that libertarian left strategy applied to the workplace. And in terms of the concrete examples of this, probably the best example is the set of Mondragon cooperatives in Spain. At the Green Academy, we had a speaker come from Mondragon and spoke at least a part of the academy on the cooperatives there. This is something that's grown up since 1956. It's pretty well known on the left, 110 cooperatives. It's all in the Basque region of Spain, and they're very industrial. They're very advanced industrial. They make all sorts of electronic and machine tools, robotic systems, numerically controlled machine tools, and so forth. And so it's not the usual sort of countercultural cooperative you might find in American college town. These are major industrial firms, and the interesting thing about them, just to say a little bit about the notion of a cooperative, is that there are different notions of a cooperative around. And Mondragon has given us a remarkable example of a redefinition, a new definition of what a cooperative is. In America, and in the traditional sense of a cooperative, in the International Cooperative Alliance, the International ICA, the idea is that the members of the firm are those that are the patrons. And patronage is defined differently in different types of firms. So in a consumer cooperative, the members of the firm are the consumers, those that patronize like a grocery store or a supermarket, not the people that work in the firm who as workers don't qualify. Or in an agricultural marketing cooperative, that's where independent family farmers, at least originally family farmers, join together to collectively market their outputs and to collectively buy their inputs. So it was a marketing cooperative on both inputs and output sides. But on the output sides, typically there's a lot of processing that goes on to try to capture the value added. So some of the biggest agricultural cooperatives in America, Land O'Lakes Butter, Ocean Spray Cranberry Juice, Sunkist, are all agricultural marketing co-ops, but all the workers in them are not members. So the members are the ones that produce the oranges or the cranberries or the milk for the butter and so forth. And they are run essentially as normal firms, normal capitalist firms. Some of the worst managers I've ever seen concerning workers are, in fact, in agricultural cooperatives like this in the United States. And similarly for other sorts of cooperatives. A housing cooperative, a credit cooperative, all these, the members, the mutual insurance companies, the members are the policy holders. The insurance company in a municipal credit cooperative, the members are the depositors, and the workers in all these cases, except industrial cooperatives, are not members. Mondragon has done it differently. Mondragon was not built upon the International Cooperative Alliance's definition of cooperative. Was built upon Catholic social thought. And the Catholic social thought that they were tapping into was the priority of labor over capital, the priority of persons over things, and that labor should in effect always be hiring capital and never capital hiring labor. So it was direct denial of wage labor or the employment relationship, whatever you want to call it. So in all the different types of cooperatives at Mondragon, the workers are members. So the ones like the industrial cooperatives, which is the core of the system, they're the only members. In the consumer cooperative, they have two classes of members, the worker members and the consumer members, and sort of half-half legally and on the board, but in fact the worker members are the ones that actually run the company, and the consumer role is restricted to sort of health issues and organic things. They don't get that involved in the actual internal running of the cooperatives. In the agricultural cooperatives there, the workers in the processing plants are members of the cooperatives, not just the farmers. And so Mondragon, by developing their cooperatives based on the Catholic social teaching of priority of labor over capital, has redefined cooperatives. And so the key thing is not the definition of patronage. The key thing is the abolition of the employment relationship, the abolition of wage labor. So the workers are always members of the company. Now, the other point I want to make about Mondragon is when you look at that first slide about the sort of socialist idea, the government will provide all these different universal healthcare, universal education, universal this and that. In Mondragon, the whole system has provided all these things for themselves with zero government input. This is done by Basque during the time of Franco, where Franco lost no opportunity to persecute the Basques who opposed him in the Spanish Civil War. So this was done very much as a private thing, not as a government thing. And yet they have their own Social Security system. They don't even qualify for the Spanish Social Security system because they're not employees. And they're the members of the company and not the employee. They're the principals, as it were, in the company. So they don't fall under the Spanish Social Security system, and thus they create their own Social Security system. They have their own medical system, their own hospital system. They have their own education system from kindergarten on up through the university. The priest, Father Arizmendi Arieta, who sort of started the whole thing and was sort of the godfather to it as it developed, started off a polytechnic school to train young boys in engineering things, and then 5 of them went off and got their engineering degrees in Zaragoza and came back and started the first cooperative there. And then the whole thing sort of grew out of that. So they have, of course, that polytechnic school is now a university, the Mondragon University, with graduate degrees and all the rest, and centers all around the Basque Country. But they also have the high schools and kindergarten and so forth. And even in the Mondragon University, there is a cooperative where people work while they're studying, so that rather than giving them a scholarship, you have a certain time you work in that cooperative, and then you learn about a workplace, and you learn about working in a cooperative workplace. And then people that graduate, they try to place them in the cooperatives. As I mentioned, they're very high tech, and this doesn't come easy. They have these R&D centers where they try to keep track of modern technology and specifically how do you take some new technology and develop a marketable product from it. So they're very much what you would call an applied technology center. And I remember we started visiting them back in the late 70s and seen in one of the research centers the folders up in the bookshelf from a semiconductor course at M.I.T. So they would go to M.I.T., go to the bookstore at M.I.T. and buy the books necessary and the Xeroxed notes for books on semiconductors, and then go back and in effect teach themselves this stuff and then develop products from it. So they're very aggressive in keeping track of how modern technology develops and how can we apply it to products in our cooperatives.
Can I ask one
Sure.
question? If I understood well, this is some sort of commune or something like that, because no one's getting money to be paid for their work, and no one's paying their services.
No, they're not. They're not government. These are ordinary cooperatives. They have their own. The net income goes to the people that work there.
But it's a state of energy.
I mean, they're getting proper salary, monthly salary.
Yeah.
They get, but it's
They have the employees. They have the employees.
They're not employees. They're members.
And they're not getting paychecks. They're getting like a dividend or something.
Well, they're getting anticipation on their net income. The net income, revenue minus non-labor cost, is net income, value added.
Okay.
All right. So they estimate how much they can pay out each month, and they pay that out. And at the end of the year, what's left is positive or negative. If it's positive, the rest can be distributed. But what is distributed to them during the year is not called wages. It's called anticipations. In the Spanish, anticipato or something. And so it's... And you have to realize that the employment relationship is a very specific legal relationship, and they're not employees. They are the members of the firm. And they live in private homes like everybody else, and they send their kids to school like everybody else. It's not a commune.
But they don't need the government.
No. Well, they need the government to...
They don't need it.
The general function...
If you look on Social Security, on the medical system.
Yeah, so the government has the minimal functions of keeping public safety and peace, and they would prefer the Basque government do that, not the Spanish government. But it's a pretty nationalistic operation, basically. So this is all very unusual, of course, and we in America, those of us in the worker cooperative movement tried to start reproducing this in the 70s when we first found out about it, and of course it is very special. It uses a lot of special circumstances which they had in Spain, which we could talk about. So the point here is not that this can be reproduced in any easy way. The point is it's real. This is not some political program I'm laying out. This is real. Go there and look at it. You can. There's a group that just went over from Ljubljana 2 weeks ago to visit, and you can organize a group and go visit. The chap that was in Wies in the Green Academy is the one who organizes all the visits. And when we first started going there, they were very hostile to foreign visitors because who are you? And on my second visit, I was asked by the Harvard Business School to write a Harvard Business School case study in Mondragon. And I thought I could go in and sort of say, well, I'm going to do the Harvard Business School case study in Mondragon and have access to their statistics. No. It says these are the 5 statistics that we make public, and that's all you're going to get. So their attitude in the beginning was very xenophobic. I mean, they were Basque, and you were not Basque. And so that has changed, that they now realize that they are getting worldwide attention from what they've accomplished, and they have to have some sort of an organized way to handle visitors and not just, give them the door in the face, which is what I got. So this chap that came to Wies is the person who's in charge of the visiting program and the sort of educating foreigners that come there. So that's Mondragon. Now the sort of lesson Mondragon is that the sort of socialist idea is that you give people economic security by giving them a guaranteed minimum income, as if this was easy to do and to finance. And where the idea of Mondragon is very different. The idea of Mondragon is we learn how to do business. We learn how to create our own jobs. We learn how to create our own businesses. And when something doesn't work, then we change it. We do something else. So there's been sort of a socialization of the whole entrepreneurial function. The entrepreneurial function is not seen as sort of special individuals can do it, but everybody learns how these businesses operate because they're the members of the business. They see how it operates, and they're able to make adjustments when one product isn't selling well. They move to make another. For example, they have I'm not sure if they still use it, but back when we were studying them intensively in the late 70s and early 80s, they had a business planning manual, how to do business plans. And in the West, when you have a business planning manual, it says you estimate the demand for your products and try to do that as good as you can, and then you back out how many jobs there will be, how many workers will you need, and how many raw materials is what you need. Mondragon, we have this many members, period. How are we going to create the revenue to support those members for the next year? And then they figure out what products are going to produce and so forth. So their fixed cost is their membership. Whereas in a traditional firm, you start with the demand and then you adjust your workforce according to the demand that you anticipate. So the general theme here is that security comes not from having a government that will promise you all these things. For the time being, economic security comes from being able to do business, learning how companies run, learning how to start new companies, learning how to restructure the companies you have to produce different products and so forth. And that's a very different vision than the sort of socialist vision of let us provide you with guaranteed minimum income, let us guarantee your jobs and so forth. And we know how that turned out here in Yugoslavia. So it's a different political strategy of the left, and fundamentally different than the traditional socialist approach to these things. Now, another thing that restricts the applicability of Mondragon is that Mondragon only does startups, and as firms expand it in the Mondragon system, they spin off parts of it. So you'll have they started off producing what in France was called the Aladdin kerosene heater. They basically ripped off the design of the Aladdin heaters, and then they just filled in they needed the metal, they needed the different parts, and so then they did a foundry and the parts companies, and then they moved into producing stoves from heaters and then into washing machines, refrigerators, and so the consumer white goods or consumer durable goods has been sort of the hard core of their business, and then they spun off everything from that everything they needed to buy from somebody else, they'd figure out how to produce it themselves, and then they would spin off a company to just do that. And that company would then do the same thing. And so you had this ramification of so now they have 110 cooperatives. If you go to their website, they have websites in English, then it's presented to the world almost as one company, the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation. So for customers where they want to do business, they'll say, here, we are this group, and we have this and this. But when you go beneath the hood and look at it, it's all these different companies. It's 110 different companies, and all bound together by this part of this group. Now,
110 companies or cooperatives?
Cooperatives. Yeah, cooperative is a company.
How many people are inside?
Actually, I've forgotten.
Around 100,000 employees.
100,000?
Actually, around 100,000.
Yeah.
So they are self-sufficient.
Yes.
Basically.
Yes. What's the sense? They.
In a sense that they don't need goods to import that much.
Yes. No. They need
they export.
They export like crazy. Yeah. And that's. If you follow the politics of the region, there is this ETA group that wants to make, wants to make Basque a separate country, and the modern group is apolitical, but if you ask them, they don't want to be a separate country in the sense that it would isolate them from markets. So in the EU, maybe they could be like Scotland might be, an independent country, or Catalonia, but they don't want to be a separate country in the old Europe where it would be harder to do international marketing. In the EU, it's easier, and that I remember when Spain went into the EU, that was a huge challenge because then they had to face a whole new wave of competition from Europe, so that's. You also have the whole Lega cooperatives in northern Italy, and both of these groups of cooperatives grew up under unusual circumstances after World War II, in the wake of World War II. That was the last major crisis in the world, was World War II, and a lot of the social experiments that we see today still going on or unraveling were things that happened after World War II. The two majorly different types of capitalism are in Japan and in Germany, where they have some form of worker involvement in companies that's beyond the straight employer-employee relationship, which is all you have in American capitalism. And those happened because in both countries, they were the defeated countries in World War II, and the old fascist ownership got pushed out. So they had to have some new form of ownership of private companies. The American occupying forces wasn't going to tolerate state ownership, and the natural owners were the workers. So you had the Mitbestimmung starting in Germany in the coal and steel industry and eventually spreading in some form to all industry, and you had the idea of the Japanese firm where it's sort of a paternalistic thing, but the workers are identified with the firm, and it's not formal ownership in the sense that we would talk about in Mondragon or in the United States. But those are two examples in the last major shift in social form after World War II. And Mondragon grew up after World War II in the devastation after the Spanish Civil War, and of course the Lega grew out of the legacy of the partisan movement in northern Italy, and we can mention Yugoslavia there as well. So this is one of the surviving social experiments from that post-World War II era that still survives and is doing rather well considering they got hit very hard by the recession, and so they're now going through a pretty major bankruptcy of one of their big firms, and that's a very interesting story in itself. We can go into. But
excuse me, who owns the banks?
They joined together to make a bank called the Caja Laboral Popular, the Bank of the People's Labor, and it is it's a cooperative bank, so it's owned by the enterprises and by the depositors. So the depositors are sort of people, even if you don't work in a Mondragon company, you can still deposit your savings in the Caja Laboral, and the governance of it is three-way. You have the depositors, you have the cooperatives, and you have the people that work in the bank. There are all sort of three ways. So across all their institutions, the people that work in the institution are members, but there may be other members. It may be a hybrid form. And the Caja Laboral is now, I think, the third largest bank in Spain. And they've spread out with branches outside the Basque Country, so people can deposit outside the Basque Country. And when I was studying them intensively in the 70s and 80s, the center of the Mondragon movement was the Caja Laboral. That was the apex of the movement. But when they started expanding out, because they sort of used up the investment opportunities among the cooperatives. They had more funds gathered than could be well invested in the cooperatives. And so they said, we have to start making loans to other firms and have branches outside the Basque Country to gather savings from out there, which they did, but then they can no longer be the apex of the movement. So this was in the late 80s or so, they reorganized and formed the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation, which is now the apex of the movement, and then the Caja Laboral is one of the second order, what they call second tier cooperatives. So the Social Security cooperative, the university, the medical system, the R&D centers, these are all second tier cooperatives that produce for the other cooperatives some service. So the point here is that since Mondragon does only startups and the spin-offs, it's not very relevant to the situation you have here, where you have a lot of existing firms that are either state-owned or sold off to tycoons or whatever, and what can be done with those that will move in this direction of worker ownership. So that's where we come to more of the American experience with the ESOPs. These I remember, I think a year or so ago, the radio transmitter repeater company at Ritz, I think we have some people here from that company, were picketing around the Parliament. They had signs that said ESOP on it, so they knew about it, and so I want to go into a little more detail now about what they are and what the American experience has been with them. And just to give you a little more background, there was a worker cooperative movement in America, or there still is, that very much looked to Mondragon as a model, and I was part of that movement. And ESOPs were, for a while, something we looked at with a lot of misgivings, and so, but that is now largely changed for reasons I'll tell you. So I don't mean to present ESOPs as the only form of worker ownership in the United States. They're not. But they've certainly become the predominant form, and the form that is least known outside the United States. People know about worker cooperatives here, and they don't want to use the word, Zaruga, but it's something that's known. ESOP is not known. And the phrase, the letters are used inappropriately, as I'll explain. So this started off in the United States in the 1970s, late 1970s, and it's grown since that time so that now 10% of the entire private U.S. workforce work in companies that have ESOPs. And for purposes of comparison, the labor movement, trade union movement in America, only about 7% of the private workforce is in trade unions. So within that 40 or so years, ESOPs have spread more than the entire trade union movement. I mean, trade union movement's going down in the United States, getting completely clobbered, and ESOPs have grown to about 10%. So what is really new about this? And most people think of ESOPs as something like where employees are buying shares. No, that's not what's happening. It's a mechanism by which workers can buy the whole company or part of the company, but with no private collateral of their own. They don't have to mortgage their houses or their cars or put up anything. The company that they're buying, the shares that they're buying, is the collateral for the loan. Now, this is something that when you buy a house, take out a mortgage to buy a house or a flat, what is the ultimate collateral for your loan? The bank will like you to have a good income and like you to have, other things, but the ultimate collateral for your loan is the asset itself that you're buying, is the house. And if you fail to make the payments on the house or the apartment, then they will foreclose and take it back. So the idea of buying something where what you are buying is the collateral is a known idea. It's not something new. And when it comes to buying companies, rich people do this all the time. All these buyout funds, private equity funds in the United States do this all the time. But this mechanism allowed it to be done by workers. And that's the real innovation, is that workers are allowed to buy the shares in the corporation where they work collectively, using the ESOP mechanism with no risk of their own private property, no risk of their home, no risk of their cars or whatever, and the company pays off the loan, not the individuals. It doesn't come out of their salary. So the company, so it's sounds like a bit of a miracle, and it is a little bit of a miracle, as I'll explain. But so workers end up owning the company, owning a major portion of the company, whatever the deal is for, and the company pays off the loan. Now, there may be, in arranging the whole deal, workers may have had to make concessions. If it's a unionized company, they may have to say, okay, we'll take concessions on our wages and translate that into ownership. That's what happened, for example, when United Airlines became employee-owned. That the pilots union and the machinist union took major concessions and were able to get the loan, and then were able to purchase 55% of United Airlines. And that deal eventually went bad for reasons we could talk about. But it was workers weren't risking their own current assets. They were taking a reduction in benefits and salary in the future in order for the banks to come in and make the loan, which is a substantial loan in that case. So there may be things that offset this, but the money is not coming out of the workers' pockets directly, and their property is not at risk. So there's various ways.
What is the risk? Where is the risk?
Where is the risk?
Yes. They could buy a company, they could take a loan from the bank.
Usually,
I don't understand.
They're not taking a loan from the bank. The company's taking a loan.
Yes.
And as the company pays off the loan, the workers get the shares. So I'll show you in a minute the details of the structure, but the risk is there's no, even if you go bankrupt, then you lose your shares, but you haven't put up any money for the shares. That's
you get ownership.
Yes.
Yeah,
but I said it's a bit of a miracle, and we'll explain why in a minute. But it's totally different than. Colleagues here talked to some ministers in the government about worker buyout here, and their reply was, yeah, well, workers can take out a loan from the bank and buy shares. And that's
but
not.
It's almost the same because the company takes a loan from a bank. And the other point, I'm not sure that I'm the owner. For example,
right.
I'm in ESOP company, but I don't have any control because someone else is making main decisions, and that's a managerial board or.
No,
that's the problem: separation of ownership and control.
Yeah, but that separation of ownership and control comes from having a distributed ownership over the whole stock market, and the shares here are not in the stock market; they're in one trust. They can be voted as one. So, if you're not controlling management, it's your fault because if it's a majority ESOP.
But it's all the same framework. Free market capitalism. That's the same framework. So these are the same risks as well.
Sure, there's the risk that the company will go bankrupt.
Yes.
And that's part of the alternative is to have the state support you, and as happened.
I don't think so.
We've already played out this thing in Yugoslavia, and we don't need to re-argue that. So I'm showing you an alternative, and that is a decentralized strategy. As in any decentralized strategy, economic strategy, you have to be on your toes to make sure that the company is viable. And it's not something that you can just relax and vote for the left party at the next election. You've got to make sure the company is viable in a market, which requires research, requires a lot of work, and the return for that is you control your own economic destiny. You're not just supported by the government. And if you want to be just supported by the government, get a government job. So let me go into the sort of the detail here of how the ESOP looks. So you see the firm there. This is the corporation. The ESOP is a separate legal entity, a trust in American law. So it could be, in German, it would be a Stiftung. It's a separate legal entity. So it could be like a nonprofit corporation here. And you have a seller of shares. Now this could be a previous owner or an owner that wants to sell the shares. And so in fact, most ESOPs by number come from cases where you have a family-owned firm. So the firm's not on the stock market. It's a family-owned firm, and the kids are not interested. The kids don't want to become managers. They want to cash out. And so the family owner has the opportunity to sell to the competition, or some of these big private equity firms that now own 10 companies like that, or to sell to the workers in the company that they presumably have some gratitude to the workers for making the company successful. So most of them come from that situation where the family owner says we want to sell to the workers, and they use the ESOP. If you run the numbers, they're actually not getting as much value as they would get if they sold to the outside. And that's a very complex calculation, but so there is, in some sense, a loss if you take the comparison of what would I get if I sold this to the competition, say, or some private equity firm. And then you have a bank or something making the loan. Now, where the seller is the state, as in a privatization, then these two may be combined. The state is the owner of the shares, and the state is not going to give you a loan. The state's just going to take seller-supplied credit. So seller-supplied credit is where you do the deal, you obligate to pay it back over time, but they don't give you money and then you give the money back to them. That would be ridiculous because they're both the seller and the source of the loan. So seller-supplied credit is the usual way in which worker privatization has been done, and I can give you the examples in other countries in Eastern Europe where that happened that way. But I've drawn the diagram here for the typical situation where you have a separate supplier of funds and a separate owner of the shares. So you start off doing the loan to the ESOP. So the company doesn't take the loan, the ESOP takes the loan as a separate legal entity, pledging the shares as the collateral. Then the money goes through to the outside buyer to purchase the stock. So this could be the family owner supplying the stock to the ESOP, owned by the ESOP. But the shares in the ESOP as a trust are not initially owned by the workers. They're held collectively in what's called a suspense account. They're suspended, as it were, in the air. And so the ESOP votes all the shares, but the workers don't have individual claims on the shares yet. Then so the stock comes in here. Then over time, later on, the company makes ESOP contributions. So this is basically the money to pay off the loan, which is a contribution from the firm to this trust. Now, how is this accounted for? Well, the traditional way, if the loan had gone directly to the company and the company pays it off, then in American taxation, I think it's the same here. The part that is deductible from your corporate net income is the interest part, because each loan payment is divided between principal and interest. Principal is the amount that reduces the total amount you owe, and interest services the loan. So only interest is deductible. In the American ESOP, the money that leaves the firm for the ESOP is all counted as labor compensation, because this is like a pension fund, counted as like a special type of pension fund that can own 100% of shares from the company, which is, of course, illegal in a standard pension fund. It has to be diversified. So ESOP is like a special type of pension fund which can be totally non-diversified and thus doesn't replace a normal pension. But because of that feature, the money paid here to here is labor compensation. So it's all deductible. So the principal as well as the interest is deductible. So this is a huge tax break to the company. So it's not just the interest portion, but the principal portion. And then the trust just passes the money through to the bank. But what happens when it passes through to the bank, then that part of the shares, that proportional part of the shares, is individuated to the workers, proportional to their labor compensation. Because it's like a pension benefit that has to be divided among the workers according to labor compensation. So it can't be something where the managers can say, well, it's all ours, because the law requires that pension contributions have to go to workers according to their standard compensation, according to their salary. So that's where the shares become individuated in the account. So you have the portion of the loan that's not paid off yet; those shares are still collective, and then the as the loan is paid off, that amount of the shares gets individuated to the individuals. So that's the basic scheme. There's other details as to what do you do over time, and the idea there is to keep the shares in the ESOP that when workers retire, they do not. I mean, you should make it so they do not get the shares individually, but the company buys them back, or the trust buys them back using contributions to the trust, to the ESOP. So the idea here is to take the ownership off the market and to keep the worker ownership over time, so that it doesn't leak out to the market. And the trust mechanism allows you to do that. But there's a lot of variation in American law as to how these things are structured. So some ESOPs have this provision, which is called repurchase liability, so the trust has to repurchase the shares when you retire, and others don't have that, and the shares just go out to the market. And if there's no public market, then that's not a very good thing. If there's a public market, as United Airlines, of course, then they would just sell them on the market. So that's the basic scheme. We can look at other details of it, but the legislative history of this is pretty interesting. This started out as sort of an ultra-capitalist scheme. Let's make the workers into capitalists. And the key person was this fellow, Louis Kelso, who was a corporate lawyer in San Francisco. And he was also a bit of a nut. And it's hard for me to describe his economic theories because they were so stupid. But let me just forget a moment about ESOP. So let me just tell you his sort of economic theory. He read the newspapers which talked about productivity statistics. Productivity goes up or down and so forth. And he noticed that productivity was actually short for labor productivity. And you just don't always say labor productivity, you talk about productivity. So he figured that everybody thought labor was the only productive factor, and he discovered that there's another productive factor called capital. And so he then published this book called The Two-Factor Theory, which was his contribution to economics to inform the world of capitalist economics that capital exists. And capitalist economists were somewhat non-impressed by this, and so the guy was treated as a nut rightly so. But he went on and he said, not only is capital a productive resource, but it's so productive with machines and computers and all these other things that if capital was paid its true reward, then workers would starve. Therefore, we need to make workers into capital owners. And then he dreamed up this whole scheme of the ESOP to make workers into capital owners. So that's where the idea comes from. I mean, it's just absurd. A bit of American amateur economics that by this chap Louis Kelso. But then he started fishing around for who was he going to convince of this theory. And there was a Southern populist United States in the, I guess, late 19th, early 20th century, Huey Long in Louisiana, and even ran for president a few times and made significant impact. Populist, like a chicken in every pot sort of slogan. And he was eventually assassinated. And his son, however, Russell Long, got into Congress and was a senator and was the head of the Finance Committee. So by whatever means, Kelso had this famous dinner with Russell Long and laid out this whole thing, saying you need to make workers into capital owners, and this will be the continuation of your father's populist ideals and so forth. And Russell Long bought it. And so the whole ESOP thing started out as being this sort of ultra-capitalist idea. Now, the way they chose and to actually implement it is where the key is. They implemented it through pension law. See, corporate law is state by state in America. There's no such thing as a federal corporation. They're always your Delaware corporation or California corporation or whatever. But pension law, tax law is all federal for the corporations. So if you want to do something in the federal government, you've got to attach it to some sort of federal legislation. And in the late 70s was the Employee Income Retirement Security Act, ERISA. And normally pension funds are forbidden to invest in the securities. So General Motors pension fund for the General Motors workers cannot invest back in General Motors stock except to a certain small percent. They have to be diversified. So the idea was to carve out a special type of fund, a qualified fund, so that qualified meaning that when the company makes a contribution to the fund, it's all deductible as labor compensation. So you get that tax break. Carve out a special type of qualified fund that can be completely non-diversified. They can own all the shares in, and in fact, that's the purpose of it, is to have this employee ownership. So that's the origin of the ESOP, the Employee Stock Ownership Plan. And it got support in Congress from all over the place. I mean, the liberals, what we in America call the left, the liberals, and conservatives both supported it. So it was very popular and got all sorts of tax breaks added to it over time and so forth. And that helped it go along. So that's how it grew to 10% of the private workforce now work in ESOPs. And for many years, people in the worker cooperative movement were quite skeptical, and that was because the trade union movements were skeptical, the worker cooperatives were skeptical, and didn't pay attention as to how these things were done. And the key was who's at the table when the whole ESOP agreement is being drawn up. And so the trade union movement was, well, you guys do the deal and we'll bargain about it later on, and which is a big mistake, because then it'll happen so that the management just controls the whole ESOP. The management doesn't get the shares, but the shares are voted. Even when the workers get the shares, they don't necessarily vote the shares. That's another feature that has to be put into the original agreement, where the vote is passed through to the individual workers or still held by the trustees of the ESOP trust. So if there's no worker representative at the board, then you can imagine that the workers all be voted by the ESOP trustees, which are selected by the managers.
Who appoints managers? Who appoints managers?
The ESOP trustees appoint the managers. Okay. The managers appoint. So it becomes the.
Okay.
Yeah. So all this was no surprise, and that's why we thought this was sort of built into it. Then the Steelworkers Union was a big breakthrough. The Steelworkers Union, the Lynn Williams, the Canadian president of it, the steel industry was dying, and there's a famous speech by the head of the research department of the steelworkers that said that within a decade the steel industry will be foreign-owned, employee-owned, or non-existent. And so the steelworkers really opened up this thing, and now in fact there's an agreement which may or may not go anywhere between the Steelworkers Union and Mondragon even to try to bring in cooperative models as well. But the Steelworkers Union started sitting at the table then and negotiating the ESOP, and we started in the cooperative movement where we started working with ESOPs as well, or worker groups that were in companies that were proposed to be ESOPs, and we found out that if you sit at the table, you can do an entirely different thing. And then the left rethought ESOPs and said it's our fault that we let so many of these ESOPs become just management tools. If we had pushed, had our lawyers at the table to negotiate the thing and so forth. And so that's what's happened, is that more and more now the ESOP movement is sort of shifting to the left. The employee ownership is becoming more and more genuine. And people that I wouldn't talk to 20 years ago, we now have a beer together and we're good friends. And because we figured out how ESOPs can be used to our benefit, or to the benefit of more cooperative models, instead of this sort of ultra-capitalist thing that as they originally envisaged. And the key to that was it was done through pension law, and pension law requires all the benefits go according to salary. The benefits cannot be collected just by the managers, otherwise they would own all the shares. So the way the managers did it wasn't to get all the shares, but was to not pass the vote through, and so they select with the bank, the initial trustees, and then trustees select them and back and forth. So that's sort of a nutshell history of this whole thing, and of course lessons that should be learned in other countries where they try to do something like the ESOP. Is there a question back there?
How many companies today is in the ownership of ESOP trusts? In the total percent, 100%? How many in the major ownership and in the minor ownership? You have?
Yeah, I don't care. Yeah, there's about 11,000 ESOPs, and
11,000.
Yeah, go to the website, to the National Center for Employee Ownership, NCEO.
It's very small.
I don't remember all the statistics, but there's some huge ones that are 100%, and there's a lot of them that are 30, 40%, and it really depends on the individual history of how it happened. But they're not. People don't do startups as ESOPs. The transaction cost of all the compliance to legislation is too large. So startups are generally co-ops. So ESOPs are either family firms that are selling to the workers, or firms that are distressed, and the workers are the last buyers, and that sort of what's called lemon socialism, where the workers are left to buy it, and those have a tortured history. Some have worked, most have not, and that's basically why Mondragon stays away from any buyouts of existing firms, because there's usually a reason why the old owners want to sell it, and the workers end up owning the lemon, and so the majority of them that are really healthy and working are the family firms that are then converted, and those are doing rather well, and so there's a huge infrastructure now. There's an ESOP association, national association of 10,000 or so members. There's the National Center for Employee Ownership, and good friends are running that, and these are good people, and they have all the sort of detailed data and so forth. You can get sample on the internet. You can get sample ESOP agreements and see all the statistics. They even have an interactive map where you can pick a part of the United States, and they'll show all the ESOPs in that part of the United States. So you can. And I don't carry around that statistics in my head.
Do you have any kind of statistics?
No.
But what are the main reasons that the owners actually is selling, let's say, their shares to the ESOP?
Well, I say the typical is the family owner, that if he sells to the competition, they will strip away the customer list and move the production over to his existing firms and wind it down. So all the workers in his firm will slowly lose their jobs, or all at once. And so, when you're a family owner, do you want to do that to your own people that have been loyal to you and so forth?
I would like to take on this question also.
Have a go at it.
If you could go back to the slide with how the money goes around.
Okay.
Goes around, comes around. Okay, just to introduce, I am a company owner. Here in Croatia, I have a little bit more than a small-sized company, and I have 9 co-owners. So we started, and it's very rare for here because it's always one boss and then workers, and I like this kind of ideas from start. So we started a little bit like this. And when I saw first this scheme now in the presentation, I saw that the immediate feeling in the room was like, wow, it's a miracle for workers. Like you get this and you give nothing. But like for me, first thought is that the workers don't get anything in this scheme, and like that capitalists, the original owners really get a lot. It's very good. And the key question is, what's the price of the company? So in economic theory, the first basic theoretical price of the company is all the future earnings of the company for entire future.
Right.
So if you pay that now to the owner, cash him out. Why is someone owner? Why somebody owns stocks? Like why are you owner? Like to get profits from the company. But if you originally paid all the future profits in the original price, then you are zero. Like you paid and you're
Only in the theory.
Yeah, of course. Only in the theory. But let's start from this theory. So if you own some company which is worth some millions of euro or dollars, at some point, like the question, why would you sell? Like at some point you feel like, well, with these millions put in bank just from interest, I could just be flying around the world and live. But instead of this, you have to work 12 hours every day in this company because anytime something could go wrong, and then you lose everything. So it's extremely stressful. Like if you're a private owner of not this huge public traded company that you can just sell on the stock market, but if it's this middle family-sized company, it can happen that you in theory are extremely rich, but in practice you live very hardship life like this 19th century worker in their mines. So for you, it's the best thing that can happen, that somebody cashes you out and gives you all these millions now, and then I know just like some other people that are owners of these smaller middle-sized companies around, and like the basic concern for all of them is how to sell my company. Like I want this, it's worth this, I want this money, I don't know how to get it.
And you don't need to think about it as 100% or 0%. So you can set this up as a mechanism to slowly cash out to your workers.
So you get cash now, and then you still keep control because you're a majority owner.
Yeah, and then over time that switches, and so.
And just one small point that the price is equal to all future incomes. That's in theory, and of course in practice you cannot know this because some companies will fail very soon, and some companies will go very up. So in the end, some workers will really profit from it if they're lucky, and some will not, and that's just the basic characteristic of the market that we have now. But in the end, the ones that are selling the company will really profit. Workers, some will.
Why will they?
Because they're cashed out immediately.
It's not the question. The question is the working place.
It doesn't have to mean that when you sit at the negotiating table that you will get everything that you would desire.
Sorry?
Just because you can think that you will get something, but when you sit at the table, then it depends on the negotiation what you will get. It doesn't necessarily mean that you will get everything.
Yeah. And the other thing here is that also remember, there's these tax breaks that are built into the model. If it's implemented the same way here, that all the money that pays off the loan is deductible from taxable corporate income, whereas a normal loan is only the interest is deductible, not the principal portion. So there's other things at play than simply future profits in the structure. But so the point here is that it's a very flexible mechanism and something you can do now, and it's not just in some future utopian situation, and it makes a slow transition if it's done slowly, or it can be 100% all at once, and or in any percentage. Okay, ready to go again? So that's the legislative history.
So we needed to elaboration to understand it.
We'll have time. No, we're the tennis match isn't until much later. So look at the legislative history in other countries. Is no country has passed this sort of a leveraged ESOP mechanism. You go across Europe. England has things they call ESOPs. They have a thing they call the ESOP Center. Blah blah blah. They're not ESOPs. They're not leveraged mechanisms. They're only employee share purchase plans where the employees can purchase shares at a discounted price, and they have to hold them for a certain number of years, and then they get a tax break.
That's what we did in my company, and it's not good.
Yeah, that's peanuts.
It doesn't mean anything.
Peanuts, and so there is a European Association of Employee Shareholding Associations or something in Brussels. The head of it is a guy named M.I.T, and they have a newsletter you can get on the internet that send it to you, and they show what happens in every country, the sort of ESOP related legislation. And I just saw Mark a few months ago, and I said, no country has passed a leveraged buyout mechanism. That's right, no country. So here you have something pioneered in America by ultra capitalists, and yet so the big fear is whatever you do here, you'll be called a socialist or Yugo nostalgic or something. This is American, and it's apple pie, and it's actually a very interesting mechanism that it's like the old joke, I can't make this up. This is not something that I would have anticipated to come out of the United States, but here it is. And so to pass this sort of legislation, we can try to mimic it, the existing laws, to set up a nonprofit corporation to hold the shares and all that. But to really do it well, you need to have legislation, and so it's something we know it's legal. It doesn't fall apart at the edges, and and so why isn't this being done by more political parties? And it's you should be able to get across the board support from the left and right. I mean it's something that gives people decentralized control of their economic life. So that's actually an idea that could be supported by the left or the right, and you could always play the worker capitalist card, turns workers into capitalists, even though they aren't capitalists in the sense of being employers. They're capitalists in the sense of having a capital stake in their company. And so I can't answer that question. I think partly it's ignorance. The people that in the Croatian government were talked to, they just couldn't imagine how workers could buy a company without mortgaging their own, putting up the money themselves, personal loans and all that there could be a leveraged mechanism. And so there needs to be a lot of education work done in countries that want to do this legislation to say this is possible, and you don't have to make it up. You can almost copy with appropriate changes the American legislation in other countries, and I'm not sure why it isn't more done. I mean, it's sort of leave that there because that really depends upon local circumstances that I don't know about. but it's not something that's coming out of some communist country. It's just coming out of the ultra-capitalist right wing in America, and we've had 40 years experience. So the legislation is all there. It's all been tried, tested, and so forth. So let me just finish up, and then we can have an open discussion. So the first part of my talk was on this concerning situation where you have natural property that isn't the fruits of anybody's labor, and everybody should have a equal right to that, and a way to do that would give minimal play to politicians to do good for you, and would put the money back in your hands to do good for yourselves. And that's the sort of social dividend idea. And then that's sort of the green part there, and the red part is this idea of the ESOPs as a way to help people get economic control of their own lives and to be principals, the owners in the company, not just employees. And the two strategies are connected because a lot of the pollution comes from companies that are totally absentee owned on the stock market, and so the people that are making the decisions don't live in the communities that are being polluted. But where you have worker ownership, then you have this sort of decentralized incentives that nobody wants to foul their own community or to have their company be identified as a major polluting factor in their own community. And so you have the sort of red theme of worker ownership tying up with the green theme of reducing pollutants in a natural way by using people's natural incentives not to screw up their own place where they live. So the two strategies tie together. Thank you.